Jason, let me ask you a question. What is the new geopolitics?
Tim, I think cryptography is the new geopolitics.
Cryptography, there you go. Short episode. Here you go, ladies and gentlemen. Cryptography is the new geopolitics. But before we go, explain that. What do you mean by that?
So, Tim, I'm going to make the argument here that cryptography is no longer just a math problem or an IT problem. It's now a top-tier geopolitical strategy.
I completely concur. Right?
I think you don't even have to be said all those words and your gut goes, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think part of the catalyst to this is really this global transition to PQC.
Yeah, for sure. We've talked earlier about this thought experiment of what if I had a magic box that could break RSA and ACC. And where we fell down is if nobody else wants it, there's a whole bunch of nations who want it, right?
So, Tim, the lock on the digital front door of every country is changing.
Yeah.
And nations now want to own the keys to their own door and not just borrow them from some technology provider.
Right. Yeah. PQC, we see the implications are very obvious when it comes to PQC. I think this also ties into something we've talked about before, which is nations outside of the U.S., in particular European nations, wanting to be less dependent on large U.S.-based tech companies.
That's happening in so many different ways.
Right.
Europe doesn't want to have Apple Wallet as the place it keeps its driver's license.
Right. Or Google Wallet. Yeah.
Or Google Wallet.
Right. Sure. Your choice of American companies that aren't me. Yes.
EIDAS 2.0 was all about making sure that they held sovereignty over that.
Yes.
So digital sovereignty, Tim, it's a major trend, as you know, it's obvious. But what I would say here is this globalized, borderless internet model. How do you define the boundaries? You define it with cryptography.
Yeah.
So everybody's seen a globe, a map, an atlas. You've seen the pink countries and the blue countries and all the, the whatever countries. Those lines that were drawn because, hey, that's where the lines were drawn. Sometimes settled by war, sometimes settled by treaty.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're now going to be settled by math. And isn't that the truth?
Yeah, absolutely. And then this ties into other things we've talked about, like this governmental yearning to control cryptography, and then more generally to control tech and control the internet, right? I think is tied into this. There is this understanding, at least at some level, that's correct, that there's a great deal of power in these things, and these things are beyond the power that governments have traditionally enjoyed, and governments don't like giving up power. And so they are grasping to hold on to this part of it too.
Let's make it real. Okay, so the UK has introduced the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. It focuses on strengthening the defenses of critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
NIS2, we talked about not long ago, elevates cybersecurity requirements across member states. In other words, there is a geographical, state-bound cryptography set of statements.
Right.
The IPCEI projects, important projects of common European interest, funding homegrown tech independence. And in Singapore, the Cybersecurity Act, which is strictly regulated critical information infrastructure. So
really any legal or governmental guideline or requirement is going to meet these criteria. Now, there are others that aren't governmental by their nature, right? Think about, PCI DSS, right? It is non-governmental and it doesn't really follow boundaries per se. It follows a different set of boundaries, which has to do with your ability to take a credit card, right? That's almost like its own nation in a different kind of breakdown of the world, right? But in terms of anything that's coming from a geographical government by its nature will be geographical in its footprint.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think, Tim, the geography of it is what's important. That's why I was saying, the title of this, cryptography becomes the new geopolitics because it literally defines where the borders are.
Yeah. Yeah. Correct. Right. And so it's interesting. There's some things that are interesting about this. One is, and we see this in the world of cryptography, to what degree are these governments able to actually control this? I think they can set minima and be pretty effective. I also think that's positive, right? You must be strengthened at least to this degree, and this is how we're going to measure that you are. And we're seeing this with mandates about migrating to PQC by way of example. It's not the only place it could apply at all, but that's a good example. I think, though, we also continue to see this desire to have backdoors or keys or other kinds of control. Yeah. And that's the part that I think, number one, is fundamentally counterproductive, or let's say destructive. And number two, if not just mathematically destined to fail, damn close to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think as people listen to this podcast and garner their insights a little more, they'll realize you've got to be holding your keys, man.
Yep. Absolutely.
And this is essentially what countries are saying.
That's the thing. Like, if I have my keys and everything is end-to-end encrypted, they can't really do anything. I mean, they can if they've got a PQC attack or an attack we don't know about. But if you set that scenario aside, because we're working on that different ways, if we assume that the cryptography is solid and unbeaten, then at that point, it just solves it.
The clue is in the word key. Sorry to make it that obvious, but that's what it is. And I think countries now see. Mm-hmm. I like the way, in my notes, the way I wrote it down, which is, man, countries want the key to their own front door.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
I think there's only one last thing to say before we end this podcast, Tim, which is verifiable security or verifiable encryption. In other words, any kind of obfuscation because of some global tech company about how the keys are stored. Think about BitLocker and the fact that the default is Microsoft holds the keys.
Right.
That's not an obfuscation. I mean, it's not hidden. But on the other hand, it's the default. And that the default typically was chosen in just about any scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting where all of this stuff gets really complicated, because Microsoft, in a way, is more akin to what I said about PCI, right? Which is, what's Microsoft patch? Microsoft's patch is Windows users and Azure users around the globe. So we could do a map of IT, right? And Microsoft would kind of be its own nation, a very, very large nation inside of that map. And that's where their policy and their decisions hold sway. And there is no clean overlap between the Microsoft map and the national governmental map, right?
Precisely. And that's where the big nation states, Western, East, anybody else, it doesn't matter. Yeah. They want more autonomy over it.
Right.
And this might seem like an obvious podcast once it's said, but Tim, this might be one of the most important trends coming. And don't forget, you and I did talk in one of our earlier prediction episodes about sovereignty of AI will go hand in hand with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And yeah, take AI and put this in the mix and all gets even more complicated.
Typically, when the word sovereignty is used, people think about data sovereignty in terms of SaaS applications. That's where most people intersect that term.
Yeah.
But it's wider. It's AI and it's encryption and the front doors to the front keys to your door itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks.